Hi guys, and welcome to another episode. Today I am joined definitely by one of my favorite block producers and all-around good guys, Yves La Rose from EOS Nation. And today, of course, hey, welcome. As today we're here, of course, to chat about Worbli. Obviously, you guys are going to be a block producer for Worbli. And I guess we can kind of kick off the chat. I wanted to ask you, how did you first kind of run into the Worbli project, and how do you think it might be good for the EOS ecosystem?
I first heard, well, first of all, actually, no, I should say thank you, Matt, for having me on again. We just had a chat like last week. Feels like forever ago now because everything moves so quickly. So yeah, thank you very much for having me on again. Just a little correction. So we're not going to be a BP on Worbli from the very beginning. We're going to be a reserve BP, as they're called, in the very beginning. We had heard, so I'd heard of Worbli now months ago. Feels like forever ago. I think maybe, I don't know, I'd say maybe before mainnet launch is what I recall. And I'd heard about this idea. And I think when I'd heard about it was during the talks where we were still thinking of potentially having KYC in the Constitution. And there was a lot of back and forth through the mainnet, that is. There was a lot of back and forth at the time as to whether or not there was a particular line in the Constitution that could be interpreted as requiring KYC somewhere down the line. And it really kind of stirred up a lot of really good conversations in the community as to whether or not we would want to add that line or remove that line. I don't remember exactly how it was worded, but it had to do with knowing the other person to whom you're transacting with, whatever that is. And so it added that KYC component. And finally, the direction that the community took at the time was to remove that line. But I think that's when I first heard about Worbli and kind of this concept of what they were trying to build. And over time kind of died down and kind of didn't really hear much about it. And I started picking it up again when block producers started joining Worbli one by one and kind of coming out to say, we're going to be block producers on Worbli. And at that time, I still didn't really know much about it. So I went out, I read the white paper, I read the short white paper, which was really, really useful, which not a lot of projects have, but that really gives you like a sense in 8 pages of what they're all about. And I thought, this is really good. Like, this is great. It kind of comes back to what we could be doing with sister chains and with this concept of using EOS to grow certain spheres in different realms of businesses or whatever districts. And I really like that term. The financial district of EOS is what they've coined themselves as. Yeah, I really like what they were kind of doing with that and what their approach was going to be. So I started looking into it. I joined the Worbli channel. And at first, I took the stance of being... I challenged them quite a bit. Like I was asking some questions based on, okay, why this? This doesn't make sense. What's your reasoning for this? But then every single question that they asked, they had some really, really good answers for it. And it was clear that there was a lot of thought that went into this project. It was clear that this project had been going on for a long time. It wasn't just, somebody who just came up with this a couple of weeks before, and that they had something really solid. So I got in touch with them through private message afterwards and said, listen, I know that you're still looking for block producers or reserve block producers. How could I help? I think this is a really, really good idea. Even if we're not a block producer, how could we help getting this idea about? Because for us at EOS Nation, it was all about growing the ecosystem. And we know from the very beginning and from even prior to wanting to be a block producer for EOS, that one of the ways EOS was going to grow is through these different projects or platforms that are going to be using EOS to grow something. And so how can we encourage that? At the time, the term sister chain, I think, wasn't even really being discussed. But if we were going to have all these different sister chains, I thought this is going to be one that's really, really solid because they're not trying to compete with EOS. They're trying to fill a particular group or a particular need within the blockchain community using or leveraging EOS. So I got in touch with them. One thing led to the next. And yeah, we were asked if we wanted to be a reserve block producer. And the more I started, the same thing with EOS, with the mainnet, the more I started learning about it, the more I liked it. And the more they clearly had thought about this. And the more I thought this is going to have such a great impact for blockchain and for EOS, I want to be a part of this.
It's really, for me, it's been really interesting to kind of watch Because I think when EOS was first launched, people were a little anxious about sister chains and about new chains coming on, right? And as you mentioned, Worbli definitely has like a specific use case that is very different than the main chain. And I think the way that they've kind of approached things and made themselves known as a friendly sister chain had a lot to do with their ultimate success, right? Because they're doing very different things that mainnet is doing. As a block producer, I wanted to ask you, of course, they have Equitable Pay for all block producers. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that ultimately that kind of contributes to more of a community of cooperation?
I wouldn't say that it would create a particular environment of more cooperation, because I think right now in the mainnet, the block producers are competing against one another, but they're also collaborating with each other because it's such a huge project. I think that in Worbli, one of the advantages of this, and again, they're not trying to compete with mainnet. And so, yes, they are centralized in a way because they do appoint block producers. And because those block producers are then able to be optimized, and they can cooperate with one another because they're not competing against one another. It does bring that cooperation level, I think, to a higher level, not taking away the cooperation that's occurring on the current mainnet as a baseline. What I think is good with having that equal pay, and it goes about with the reserve block producers as well, is that it creates that stability. So if you're going to be operating in this financial realm and you want to be compliant with financial legislation, regulations throughout the world as much as possible, you want to be able to, the type of customer that you're going to try and go get and the type of business that you're trying to onboard in that financial district will really, really want that stability, the reliability. They want to have really that base that doesn't change. And because, again, it's a huge risk. And I was watching Dominique do an interview the other day, and one of the things he was talking about was, especially if you're going to deal with insurance companies, or you're going to deal with large institutional financial players, one of the big scary things about blockchain is that lack of transactional confidence or certainty, or that risk. And unknown risk is, in fact, high risk in a way, because you just don't know. So it could be low, could be high, but because it's unknown, you typically assign a higher risk than a known risk. And by having all the block producers get paid equally, and by having the block producers go through KYC and being able to know who they are and be able to monitor and correctly, I guess, them be accountable for their infrastructure, you're able to increase that reliability, effectively reducing the risk. And that pay, again, by having everybody together combined, also increases the reliability of the infrastructure, because nobody's trying to outdo one another. You're actually trying to help each other out, because you're not trying to go for votes. You're not trying to compete. You're not trying to outshine your opponent. That has advantages, but it also creates this more of a roller coaster. And we've seen that with mainnet, where I think at this point, there's only 5 block producers that have been in the top 21 from the very beginning, which means that the other 16 have been in or out at a certain point, right? Whereas with Worbli, the idea is this is going to be very stable. If you're going to want to be dealing with insurance companies, with large financial investors and kind of that financial realm, you want that complete stability. For a block producer to know how much you're going to get every month, and that you're going to be able to use your baseline, figure out what your operational costs are, and do everything with that one number in mind, and know that everybody else is doing the same. You're able to optimize that system. I think that's really good.
I always kind of ask this question, and of course you and I have had some great conversations, so I really want to get your insight into it. Do you think that it's possible that ultimately Worbli could perhaps contribute to digital assets, EOS, Worbli, amongst others, through IBC, perhaps achieving mass adoption? What are your thoughts?
I definitely think so. I think that the approach that they're taking, again, is really not trying to take anything away from mainnet, but really to add on. And we were having this discussion before. I think that part of that branding and part of the direction and the vision that they have and the mission that they've set themselves is really powerful. And I think that definitely not only could it help achieve mass adoption in that particular sphere, I think it will actually help for mass adoption with the mainnet. And so it really doesn't take away from mainnet. If anything, in my opinion, it actually adds to mainnet, and it adds to the credibility of EOS, and it adds to the credibility of this whole space that we find ourselves in. which is often put into I guess, negative light, especially in mainstream media. Having this super KYC compliant, very, very compliant structure in a particular space will just bring light to the project. So I think it might be a good testing grounds for some, but because it's based on EOS, it'll still trickle in and you're still going to get people that see what the software, the baseline, the underlying software is EOS. That will bring adoption to EOS as well. I definitely see that a lot of these financial players, industry players will, in my opinion, I think use Worbli as a definitely a playing ground to be able to do their business. And then those who perhaps are a little bit more tolerant to risk and they're okay with a more decentralized nature of things might then port over to EOS. But again, I don't see that as being competition with one another. I see them as being complement to one another. You're offering an extra service so that in terms of your user base that you have access to, I think EOS with Worbli, through Worbli, has just expanded the amount of users that potentially can bring to the space. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, actually. And it's an angle that maybe I hadn't have considered before, but it's a really valid point. If we can get some of these financial institutions involved to utilize the software, realize how fast it is, how effective it is, and how powerful it is, then ultimately we'll probably see a lot more dApps that want to operate under maybe a different set of governance structures for a completely different use case on the mainnet. So it's a great point.
That's the thing with Worbli as well, right? Is that right now a lot of where the opportunity lies is because 99.999% of the people haven't even heard of what blockchain is, let alone, maybe they've heard Bitcoin or whatever in 2017. But most people, really, the vast majority of people do not know what blockchain is. And so it's kind of scary. And so to have this option that goes through all the hoops to make sure that they're, financially, legislatively, regulatorily, if that's even a word, compliant, I think that because it reduces the risk, it gets people to come in that normally probably wouldn't have come in. And then once they're comfortable in this space, and then they start to understand what blockchain is, because most likely they're in here, as long as you as an end user don't see the difference of, so if you're on your mobile or if you're on your desktop and you're accessing some type of application, as long as the interface and the UX of it is so flawless that you don't even realize you're on blockchain. Once you realize you're on blockchain and you get that light of, I've been in blockchain this whole time and it's been so smooth, it's been so great, blockchain then becomes less scary. And then you're perhaps more open to other projects on the blockchain because you have this good experience. And I think part of what they're going to do is create that first good experience for people with a lot of assets or businesses with a lot of assets that then can port over to other projects within the space. I see, it's going to be great. I really see that as being one of the ways that EOS or blockchain in general is going to have mainstream adoption is through Worbli, for sure.
Well articulated. I wanted to ask you about your experience. How has your experience been with the Worbli team so far, with a lot of the things that you guys are getting ready for, and just kind of overall, how's the experience been of working with Worbli?
Well, personally, I'm not on the tech side. So Denis, our CTO, is the one that's been setting up all the infrastructure, and he's been hooked up from the very beginning. And I talked to him before this interview to find out kind of what his experience was. And he said it's been really, really great. So the documentation that's out there is just really, really good. It took him a couple of minutes to be able to be set up. If you're already experienced with the EOS software and being able to use CleOS and ODEOS, then it's very similar because pretty much the back end of Worbli is exactly the same. They've changed a couple of parameters. I think they changed the RAM allocation model, or they've changed a couple of things, but really the experience as a whole from a backend, from a technical point of view, is pretty much the same. So he's definitely had a really good experience doing that. Super easy to set up. And the people on the Worbli side that have helped them set up have been just amazing, just really, really responsive. There's always somebody there. We've got a couple of ways to contact people, either through Telegram, so another Telegram channel, or through Slack. And a lot of the information is through Slack as well. So anyways, on his side, very, very good. On my side personally, because I'm more on the community and the governance side, a lot of what I've been seeing is the relationship between the other VPs. And it's really cool because, again, you're talking about that cooperation. nobody in there is competing, right? So it's kind of like a little family that we've built in Telegram, which is really nice. So everybody raises their hands like, oh, we need to do something. Can anybody volunteer for this or blah, blah, or we need to sign a new transaction, this, blah, blah, blah. Everybody raises their hands and everybody's like, oh, I could do this part. Okay, I could do this part. And nobody's trying to get credit for anything because it really doesn't matter in the end, right? And so my experience being in that little new family with incredible other block producers team, the guys and girls that are in Worbli right now, just amazing people. I think Dominique and his team have chosen some really, really amazing VPs to represent this project and to be able to onboard and launch this project. So my experience personally has been wonderful.
Yves, as always, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to chatting with you again in the future. I look forward to seeing the Worbli project kind of come to fruition, and I look forward to kind of continued updates and EOS Nation being a part of all that.